This is a tutorial to help people get started creating a scenario for the UK Train Sim Great Scenario Challenge number 1. In this tutorial we're just going to show you how to create a scenario for one of the default routes that you're allowed to use in the scenario, in the challenge rather, and also the object set filters that you're allowed to enable for the challenge. And finally we'll cover just the absolute basics for getting a locomotive into a scenario. So the first thing we're going to do is select the editor option, and then we're going to choose the route that we want to use. So I'm using the default Newcastle to York route, and then we select scenario editor on the right hand side. We want to create a new scenario, so we simply click new scenario here. We need to choose where the scenario will start, so I'm going to choose York, and we need to choose our type of scenario, so we'll choose a standard scenario, and then click create scenario. Now this is the first important thing that you must get right, and that is to specify a name for your scenario, but to a specific format. We want to make sure that every scenario submitted to the challenge is easily identifiable by users when they're judging them. So we're going to call all scenarios must start with GSC for Great Scenario Challenge 1 followed by a colon. So then I'll use my actual scenario name, so example scenario. So GSC 1 colon and then your scenario name. Then click create scenario. Railworks will now create a brand new scenario and then load up the Newcastle to York route. So we can see the scenario and route is now loaded, and we're actually partly submerged at York Station. The first thing we're going to do then is we're just going to drag our scenario marker by clicking and holding to a more appropriate location. I'm then going to use the blue arrow on the object just to raise that scenario marker up. So we've got our scenario created. What we need to do is first of all specify some details of our scenario. So I'm going to pin out the markers just by moving my mouse into the corners, the panels rather, moving my mouse into the corners and selecting the little drawing pin icons, and then I'm going to double click my scenario marker icon, and again I'm going to pin out this panel at the right. When I double click this marker, I get all the options for the scenario. So the first thing we need to do is supply a description. Now each of these icons here, if you just place your mouse over them, it will tell you what you're meant to be entering into the box. So let's give our scenario a description. The description is shown to users on the main loading screen when the user is choosing the scenario. We also need to supply a briefing. A briefing is shown to users when they press F1 to bring up the list of tasks that are required to be completed for the scenario. So this will be the additional information about the scenario. Next we have the author box. Now this again is very much like the scenario name. It needs to follow a specific format. Again, this is so it's easy for users to know whose scenario they're judging when we get to that part of the challenge. So if you're an individual who's entered the challenge, you simply enter either your name or your UKTS username. If you're entering as part of a team, then you need to enter your team name into this box. I'm going to use my UKTS username. The next box is a start location. Well, for me that's York Station. Then we have the date that the scenario is set. We have a rating, which is a number from 1 to 5, 1 being easy and 5 being the hardest. Then we have the duration of the scenario. Again, this is important. The rating and the duration are shown to the user when they're choosing the scenario, so that they know if they want an easy scenario or a long scenario, they can choose those options. Then we have the start time for the scenario, the weather, the season, and finally what type of traction the scenario is going to use. Well, I like diesel, so I'll choose diesel. So we've just gone through all the options that you need to do to set the scenario up for the challenge. The next thing we're going to look at is the object filters. This allows you to enable additional assets for your scenario. To ensure that the scenarios entered into the challenge have the broadest possible audience, we're restricting the choice of object set filters that you are allowed to enable. This all sounds quite complex, but it's not really. First of all, you need to click the little box with the blue box with the orange triangle icon, and then you'll see this panel appear on the right hand side. Again, if you've not pinned the panel out, you just need to move your mouse to the corner to make it show up. Now for the challenge, a limited number of developer filters are allowed. We're allowed to enable all of the Kuju folder, because these are all default assets. We can also enable the Eisenbahnwerk RW folder. These are the German assets, and also part of that is the German railroads. We can enable those as well. We can also enable the RSDL foliage assets and the UK wagon pack as well. Don't forget we have our American assets, which is the Castle Rock Railroad. Finally, we've got the asset pack that was very generously created by Derek from RSC for the route building challenge number 2. So that's RSC and then AP station. A full list of the allowed developer filters is available in the rules for the challenge. So the last thing we need to do is actually add some rolling stock to our scenario. So we simply click the locomotive icon here on the left hand side. As I say, I'm a bit of a diesel fan, so I've chosen a class 37, and then we just drag the mouse to the rails and click, and we have a locomotive in the route. The next thing we need to do is add a driver to that locomotive, so we simply click the driver icon here and then click the locomotive, and the little icon will appear above. Now for a standard scenario, every locomotive must have a final destination. Now the timetable view is very useful when creating scenarios. So we enter the timetable view, and here's my locomotive here, my service. We need to give it a final destination. Again, we click here and we simply choose the last place we're going to go. Darlington Siding 8, it's fine by me. Also a useful option is choosing whether this service is the player service, the one that the player is meant to drive. Again, you put your mouse over that icon, it tells you what it's meant to be used for. So we just check that box and click OK. That's pretty much everything you need to do to create a scenario. One top tip, this is a gotcha. Most of the default routes will be locked. You'll find that after you've created your scenario, you might not be able to go back and edit it, and this is simply because you need to unlock the route to allow editing of scenarios. If you find you can't get into your scenario, simply enter the route and then enter the world editor and make sure you've unlocked that route. Good luck with the challenge, and that's the end of this tutorial.